Welcome back, everybody. Sorry for the little delay. We were just running into some breakout room issues. But we're going to talk for the next 70 to 75 minutes about peer review. Something just happened during the break. Hello, Ph.D. It's a podcast. It's called Hello, Ph.D. It's hellophd.com. I did an interview with them a couple weeks ago, and the podcast that talks about mentoring and a whole bunch of things that we'll be covering today just dropped. So if you visit hellophd.com, it's a great resource for all things related to professional development, and we spent some time talking about mentoring and some of the other things in the book. So today, we're going to talk a bit about various elements about peer review. We're going to conceptualize peer review within the context of the shared universe framework that we discussed earlier. We're going to talk about peer review and its key role in ensuring quality control and research. And within the context of all that, we're actually going to identify some concrete strategies that you can use to make sure the system works the way it's supposed to do, to give you fair evaluations of your work. And we're also going to talk about the strategies that often work when the system isn't quite working the way that it should. And as we mentioned before in the previous workshop on mentors, please use the text function to ask any questions you might have. We're going to save some time at the end, but if there are any clarifying questions you have during the workshop, we'll get into those as well. So we're going to talk about peer review, how it fits within our scholarly universes and our galaxies. And so, when I mentioned before, mentors work in an interconnected space, a shared universe of other scholars who do work in similar domains, and every mentor is kind of like a galaxy that encompasses a variety of different kinds of questions and research ideas and studies that revolve around an overarching theme. It turns out that in universes, these interconnected systems, sometimes you can find colleagues in that system that mentors readily collaborate with, and some where the mentor doesn't work with that other scholar, but at the same time, that scholar knows a whole lot about what the mentor does because they have expertise in the general area. We're going to talk a lot about those scholars today. We're going to call them evaluators or reviewers. So they're people that don't share what we call a conflict of interest with your mentor, but nonetheless have expertise that's related to what your mentor does. These evaluators play a key role in all of our scholarly universes because what they do is that they serve a quality control role in that they carefully evaluate, scrutinize everyone's work, including your mentor. And so the key goal of this workshop is to identify concrete strategies that are going to facilitate that people use to disseminate work to colleagues. Your mentor uses them, and you're going to learn how to use them as well. So I like to think about peer review as a quality control system. And what I mean by that is that the academic outlets that disseminate work, our academic journals, are usually governed by a publishing company of some sort, but that publishing company doesn't have expertise in that particular set of domains. And so what these academic outlets do, these journals do, these publishing companies do, is they outsource the expertise. They identify experts like your mentor who collaborate with the publishing company, collaborate with the journal to judge the quality of work submitted for consideration. Now, keep in mind, when I say quality control, you might think to yourself, okay, so like the thing in the factory with the cars and the phones and the TVs and the laptops to make sure that if I buy one, it doesn't blow up in my face, right? That's quality control in those systems. And in those systems, usually you can link quality control with objective outcomes. So if somebody in the factory messes up and doesn't put the right bolt into a car, you'll know that there's a quality control issue when cars of that model get into more accidents, there are more safety hazards, and usually that company sells less cars. And so you can usually draw a key distinction between poor quality and objective outcomes. And that's not the way peer review works. The way peer review works is that you submit work publication. Yes, there's people involved in judging the quality of the work, sure, but those people are giving qualitative and quantitative ratings of different kinds of evaluations, but they're subjective in nature. There's no one comment a reviewer makes that you can objectively link to improvements in the quality of the work, or improvements in whether or not or the degree to which the work influences the field as intended. And so you have to work within those kinds of spaces. So the goal that we're going to focus on today is to submit your work. When you're submitting your publication, submitting it in such a way where you increase the likelihood that you're at least getting a fair evaluation. So even if it's subjective, it's at least a fair subjective evaluation. Peer review does, includes a variety of different fair elements that we'll go into later on. Things like, the ability to make recommendations as to who might review your work, the ability to respond to the same people in your cover letters and your responses to commentary, like when you get your paper invited back for revision, you get to respond back to those same people who reviewed your paper the first time. Those are elements, those are fair elements of the process. There are also unfair elements of the process, things like that we'll go into in a few minutes, and it's important for us to understand what these fair and unfair elements are so we can work within the system and ensure that it does what it's supposed to be doing. We'll go into those in a little bit, but in any event, the review process itself has a variety of different kinds of interweaving systems. You submit a paper to a journal. That journal then assigns that paper to the editor-in-chief. The editor-in-chief then selects somebody to handle it, somebody to govern the review process, an action editor. They might be the action editor, somebody else will be an action editor. We'll go into that in a second. That action editor solicits reviewers, those evaluators we were talking about. That editor looks over the reviews, makes a decision. And we're going to talk a lot about the revise and resubmit process. That's the time where an editor looks over a paper and says, this paper needs some work, but I want to see a revised version of it. I don't want to reject it outright. I think it's got potential. Within, like I mentioned before, journals outsource expertise, and that outsourced expertise takes the form of an editorial board, which usually consists of a series of different kinds of people. The editor-in-chief, who might handle your paper, the associate editors, who work in concert with the editor-in-chief, particularly if they have expertise in areas of research that the editor-in-chief does not have. So they handle papers on a variety of different kinds of topics. And then a set of editorial consultants. These take the form of some of the reviewers who evaluate the work, but sometimes associate editors can actually seek out reviewers who have expertise outside of the editorial consultants on the editorial board that we call ad hoc reviewers. And then when the action editor gets the paper, they make that kind of decision-making process for them with the other reviewers. Journals vary widely, as you might know, in terms of timelines for submission. In psychology, usually 2 to 3 months. In medical journals or neuroscience journals, sometimes the journals take much less time. Sometimes because the papers have shorter length, things like that, like a month. Sometimes, if you're doing work, for instance, in the context of the COVID pandemic, journals might actually post online. We'll do a rapid review for these kinds of papers. And these review timelines, even if the journal posts on a website that the average paper takes 2 months to review or 3 months to review, sometimes the process takes a little bit longer if an editor encounters difficulty finding reviewers, which is happening a lot, by the way, within the COVID pandemic, because all of us are working from home, and then because it's tough to balance work and home obligations. Well, it's in my own experience, and I've noticed this from talking to other editors, it's becoming a little harder to find reviewers to review manuscripts. After the reviews come in, the action editor makes a decision, and it's one of these 3: accept for publication, reject for publication, and this advisory submit, what we're going to call colloquially as R&R. Most papers, whenever you read the final version of a paper, the grand majority of these papers went through an R&R process before the paper was eventually accepted. So having these skills in negotiating the advisory submit process is crucial to be successful in disseminating your work to your colleagues. Here's the bad news. Think about the least reliable measure in any study you've done, your thesis, your dissertation, your senior thesis. Chances are the reliability of peer review is worse than the least reliable measure you've ever used to address a research question. So if you look at the reliability of any two reviewers' decisions, so basically when two people independently review a piece of work, to what degree are they making ratings, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, that are redundant with each other, where you can be confident that any random person you pick is going to wind up giving you the same kind of a recommendation as to what to do with a paper. So peer review is also part of other systems like the grant review system. All these issues that we're raising have also manifest in grant reviews as well. But suffice to say that when you look back at the research, you find really low levels of reliability across review decisions. So Cicchetti back in 1991 took papers from that had been previously published by another journal and took those papers and submitted them in quotes to a new set of reviewers. Now these are papers that are already accepted in a good journal, and the iterative reliability for those decisions, whether or not the new group also accepted the papers, was ridiculously low. Even when you look at these data in terms of quantitative ratings, so really great meta-analysis from Marsh and colleagues and the American Psychologists back in 2008 looked at the grant decisions from the Australian Research Council, which bears some similarity to our own funding agencies. They too include ratings for how good the proposal is, how good the research team is, and you'd have to ramp up the number of judges considerably. This is for the correlation between two people to be able to have any kind of confidence that the decisions you're making are precise enough where different kinds of reviewers are more or less going to come to the same kind of decision. They're really, really, really low. Here's the good news. If you get to a spot where you submit a paper for publication and the editor says, revise it and send it back, that's the saving grace of this system. It's unreliable, and it's possible to encounter a fair degree of reviewer biases, but this system does improve the quality of the work once it gets to this advisory submit stage. Now, anyone who's submitted more than a few papers has encountered those comments from peer reviewers where they say to themselves, I don't want to do that. It's not going to make the paper better. Like, I don't agree with that. As we'll go on later on in the workshop, you're probably going to wind up doing it anyway. But they're the exception to the rule. Those kinds of comments are the exception, the general exception to the rule. Because what I'll say to you, I'll make a solemn promise to you that over the course of your career, over the course of your doctoral training or postdoctoral training, if you submit a paper for publication, you get suggestions from your peers, you heed to their comments and revise the paper accordingly, that final product, when you finally get the acceptance letter, you will always say to yourself, you know what, this was a better version of what I sent them the first time. It always happens. I'm over 100 articles in, 100 peer review articles into my career. I cannot point to a single paper where I can say to myself, first version was better than what they eventually accepted. It just doesn't happen. So now we're going to get into some concrete strategies for what the system looks like, or what kind of strategies you can use when the system is treating you in the way that it should. It's giving you a fair evaluation of your work. And I'm not saying, and notice that I keep on saying fair evaluation, not they liked it, not strategies to get your paper accepted. No, the whole way through this process is the best stance you can take to to do justice to peer review as a quality control system is saying to yourself, I just want to be treated fairly, even if that means that somebody rejects the paper. First thing is to do your detective work. And by that I mean, the peer review process doesn't start after you submit the paper. It starts way before that, because it turns out that you can actually have a considerable amount of control, not just about where you submit, but even who your reviewers are. You might be looking at me incredulously right now. I get to pick my reviewers, not technically, but you can give recommendations, and you can do that in a variety of different ways. As you start picking journals, start looking at the editorial board. Editorial boards, I always say this to all my colleagues, editorial boards are like political documents in that when you look at that editorial board, the degree to which you feel like you're getting a fair review should be partially explained by whether or not you see your own work reflected in the areas of expertise of the editorial consultants, of the associate editor, of the editor-in-chief. The degree to which you see overlap should start getting you a sense of whether or not you can get a fair evaluation. So you should pick your reviewers. And there's a variety of ways of doing this. In our current online submission systems, all of us submit papers online now, sometimes you'll be asked straight up, what kinds of, which reviewers do you suggest? So you can do that in the online system. I would also recommend that you mention it in the cover letter. When you submit, every time you submit a manuscript, you submit a cover letter too. And you tell, most the cover letters will say, you know, we're really happy to submit this paper. The title is this. The work that we report was either be approved, all that kind of stuff. But I also include in these cover letters a couple of recommendations on people to review the paper, and I always try to include at least one or two people who are on the editorial board. But if I find people outside the editorial board who I think might be a good reviewer, I also include them too. So I'll have this bit of information in the cover letter. By the way, all of these little examples that we're giving here, all of them are on the Dropbox folder. So you have access to all of the things there as well. And this is what I do. I basically say, it's usually hard to pick reviewers in my area. That's what I found. And you know, in terms of like people who provide fair evaluations, and but these people I think are people who provide fair evaluations. Now, importantly, these are people who know your area well, but share no conflict of interest with you. They are not a former collaborator. They're not somebody with whom you're working currently. They're people who are disentangled from you, share no conflict of interest, but they nonetheless have the expertise to review your work. Okay, so that's the process at the beginning. What happens after? What happens when you get the reviews? What might that look like? Well, here's what I'll press upon you. I'll ask you a series of questions. Let's say you got your decision letter, it hit your inbox, and you got your heart's jumping out of your chest. It says decision on your manuscript number. You're like, oh no. And then you open it up. You know, how are you feeling? I mean, all of us, and when we get these emails, our hearts are jumping out of our chest. It feels like you're playing roulette and you got $1,000 on red, right? You know, and you know, in that context, are you really in a space to think rationally? No, you have your emotions swimming all over the place. You know, so what I always do is put myself in this context. Like I get this email in my inbox, and like, you know, this is, I should lean into my emotions here, right? I'm going to give you an idea of what this means, because it can take ridiculous lengths. So this is a paper that I submitted soon after starting my position at University of Maryland, where I've been since 2008. And I submitted this paper. You know, good news, the editor asked us to send the paper back, and then we started the revision process. And you know, we had you know, some really good reviews, but then reviewer two, it's always reviewer two, had some really interesting things to say about our paper. Take a gander at the kind of comments we got. Reviewer two told us that the literature review in our introduction missed the boat. They said we didn't bother to engage in the relevant literature. You know, they basically said introduction very bad. towards the end of their review, they even said that they didn't read the rest of the paper, but they skimmed towards the end the discussion, and they thought the discussion sucked too. Right? So this is an extreme version. I think I mentioned this earlier. I submitted this near the beginning of my time at Maryland. I've been there for 12 years, so you don't get this often, but you do get it on occasion. So what I suggest people do, particularly if they're new to publishing, is to submit your paper for publication. You get your review back. Go open the decision letter, skim it, and get to the point where they made the decision. Did the editor reject your paper? Did they ask for rather submit? Don't read the comments. Just look at the decision, and then just let it sit for just a few days. Just get get in that space where you've gotten used to knowing what happened with the paper, what the outcome was. If you give yourself that time, that mental space to clear your thinking, by the point at which 2 or 3 days pass, you're in a spot now to be able to work from there. Because what you do there is then you start thinking about action, and the first action you should do is to itemize your decision letter. And by that I mean, go back to the comments. Go back to the editor's comments if they made comments specifically to you, reviewers' comments because they made them definitely specifically to you, and start creating your to-do list. Go through reviews and start numbering your comments, right? Even if they didn't do it. So sometimes reviewers just write it in paragraphs. Itemize it for them and make them comment by comment by comment. Reviewer 1, comment 3. Reviewer 3, comment 5. Reviewer 2, comment 4. Because then that becomes your to-do list. In many respects, I would argue that this decision letter is more important to the outcome of the paper than the actual revisions you make on the paper itself. They're both important. The decision letter is actually the cover letter that you send back, where you highlight your response to reviewer commentary, is probably a little more important than what you actually do. And so, in the Dropbox folder, you have a template. I'm giving you the same template in Word format that my team uses whenever we submit a writer's submit, whenever we do a cover letter. We itemize all the responses. We itemize a comment. We itemize the underlying response. Comment response until the whole thing is done. Once I've itemized, once I have my thing, I do what Tony Stark did, back in the Avengers. I have a plan, attack. I take that cover letter and I say to myself, I'm making a deal. I'm going to address one comment per day. Now do the math. Even if you have a big review process in front of you, like you got 30 comments across all 3 reviewers. If you tell yourself, I'm going to address one comment per day, you're done in a month. And most of these journals are going to give you about 45 to 60 days anyway if it's a really, really big revision. If it's a minor revision with just a few comments, you'll get about 30 days. But you might get upwards of 2 months to be able to revise this paper in response to commentary. Taking this approach will help you accomplish it. And so going back to that original review that I showed you, this was our comment. This was our commentary back. So we said, the reviewers were really helpful with their suggestions. Well, notice we're making no reference to any of them. Remember from a few minutes ago, reviewer 2 was very mean, objectively mean. But we're not going to mention any of that stuff during the cover letter, and in a little while I'll explain why. Notice, remember before that was reviewer 2. Look what we do at the beginning of the cover letter, of addressing the comments specifically to reviewer 2. We thank reviewer 2 for saying a few nice things, because every review, no matter how destructive the commentary is, how unkind the comments are, usually start with saying something nice about the review. It's kind of like the movie poster that you see sometimes, where it's like, the movie poster has the words and it's quote fantastic, from like a review from something else, or like incredible, but then if you go back and read the review, it's like, this is an incredible piece of crap. Like the poster rarely has the full context of the entire review. But what you're trying to do with this is get the editor to realize, because the editor's got 20 papers on their plate. They didn't read it. They didn't read the comments as carefully as you did. This is your paper. You should be reading it more closely than the editor did. And so what you're trying to do there is, editor at least knows the reviewer two wasn't very nice, and actually it's a really harsh thing to say, but they at least said something nice, and that usually gets the editor in a frame of reference where it's like, this paper's got potential. I remember this paper, it's got potential. Remember before, the reviewer two said some pretty unkind things about our introduction. Notice what we did here. Did we come back and punch back? Did we say anything nasty here? No. What we did was we constructively addressed the comments and said, we thank reviewer two for pointing us toward articles that speak to the issues that we cover in the paper. We just come back, and you always take what Spike Lee would called, years ago when Clint Eastwood was really mean to him in the press. Somebody asked Spike Lee for a response. Spike Lee said the following: "I'm going to take the Obama high road," and then just stopped and then just didn't address it. And here you're addressing it head on, but you're doing it in a constructive way. And the reason why you do that is because you want to make it clear to the editor that you took the process seriously, and unlike reviewer two, you're going to treat the process with respect. And if that happens, the editor is more likely to give you the benefit of the doubt. If you come back and you're mean, now you're on the same level as your reviewer two in terms of tone. So avoid that. Always be constructive. I always suggest that people come into the revision process assuming that you're going to do everything the reviewers say. And if you can't fix everything, the cover letter is where you justify why you can't. So if you can't do something in response to reviewer two comment 4, you have to give a really good reason in the cover letter why you didn't do it. You cite evidence to support your decision. If you don't have the data, maybe a reviewer asks for an analysis that you can't perform, then that gives you a signal. You say, unfortunately we couldn't do that, but we highlighted the fact that we couldn't as a limitation of our study. So always give the reviewer something, particularly if you know you can't do exactly what the reviewer asked. So that's something we actually did in another paper that was published in 2019 by a former student of mine, Laura Glenn. And one of the reviewers had a really great feedback on new literature to include in the introduction, particularly to justify the conceptual rationale for doing the study. Really great piece of advice, very constructive. And that's what we did in response. When we wrote the cover letter in response, we did what the reviewer suggested. We highlighted new areas of work and provided additional justification for why we're doing what we're doing. Why do we want to address this or do this study? This reviewer also provided really great feedback. It was clear from the commentary that the reviewer read the paper very closely and was kind of unclear as to some of our terminology, some of the uses, some of the words we use in particular context. A lot of us use the word context for a lot of different ways, a lot of different reasons, and so this was a really great opportunity to further unpack how we use this term, because other scholars use this term in very different ways. For us, it was the social context. And so we made that clear in our response to reviewers in the cover letter, but also in the paper. You'll notice in a lot of these comments, you see a lot of highlights in yellow. In our cover letters in response, we'll usually, particularly if it's helpful for reviewers to find the comments, we'll highlight the text in the paper to tell them exactly where things were. And sometimes when reviewers come up with a comment and it's constructive and it's useful, they'll usually have a series of comments that revolve around a larger theme. And one of the big themes that this reviewer had was, I think you did too much. I think you subjected this particular data set to too many analyses. I would trim it down. And so that gave us an idea. Okay, this is a big concern for this reviewer, and we agree this is something we should attend to. And so we try to make it clear that we thought about this concern on several different levels and addressed the concern in several different ways. So we highlight that. We say we looked at it in at least 3 ways. We revised our study aims, streamlined them, and then the other thing we did is that the reviewer was kind of getting us a set of comments that made us think they think we're not well powered to test our aims. what we did was we added, they didn't ask us to do this, but we made a guess. We hypothesized, they think we're underpowered. Let's demonstrate that we were well powered to detect the effects that we observed. And so we added a new element to our data and analytic plan that allowed us to do that. And then, we also went, they didn't ask us to do this. Again, another thing they didn't ask us to do, but what we thought was, they might think, regardless of what we do, that this is still a limitation of the study. Limitations don't necessarily get you rejected. Every study's got limitations, you know that. And it's important to be forthright and open about the limitations of your study, because you want readers, when they see the eventual paper, to understand, how to ingest the work, how to interpret the work. Right? So we added a limitation in the discussion section. We said, look, we were well powered to detect our effects, but this is a small sample, relatively small sample. When it comes time to thinking about, soliciting advice, because sometimes you get a comment that's really hard to address. What you ponder, you can't come up with a good answer. Your colleagues, your co-authors in the paper, they're a great resource for bouncing ideas on how to address something. But, if you need help, and I do this all the time. Actually, I did this the other day for a paper I have under review. I contacted the action editor and asked a couple of questions that were tough for me to handle. I wanted to get their advice. It's okay for you to ask the editor. You can't contact the reviewers, but you can contact the editor. You know that person, and ask them. I see reviewer 2's comment there. I can't. This is the best I can do to address it. Do you think that's a deal breaker? Do you think that's something that's going to be something that amounts to the paper being rejected? The editor is going to give you a straight up response. They want to spend time on your paper insofar as they can help you improve the work and eventually, hopefully, accept it for publication. So it's always good to think about seeking out advice. The other thing you should do is empathize with the people who spent their time reviewing your paper. And the reason why I say that is that the editors might or may not get paid for the work. Some journals pay their editors, some don't. Reviewers don't get paid. They're doing this pro bono. They are legal. They're the legal counsel that gets no money for representing your client. You're getting free advice. So if you're going to get free advice, then the least you can do is make it easy for them to track your responses to their comments. So things like not just itemizing things in the cover letter, but also telling the reviewer exactly where your revision is. Page 5, we did this. And on page 10, we did that. And you highlight the thing in the manuscript so that they see it. So that's something that we did on this paper that I referenced before. This was like the revision. This was the decision from our revised paper, and more or less the reviewers thought we did an okay job. But and at the same time, reviewer 2 had some additional comments, which were great comments. And there was a comment about our decision to do a particular thing in our study, which is to pool subgroups of people coming in for a clinical evaluation versus those in the control group, pooled into one large sample. So the reviewer pointed us to a way of testing whether or not we were justified in pooling those kinds of samples. Great suggestion. So we took the advice, and then we addressed this comment in several different ways. We ran the analyses suggested by the reviewer. We reported the findings, and it turns out that we actually did have some support to do the things that we did. And then we also reported in preliminary analyses these same kinds of tests. We revised our analytic plan. We reported the findings from the preliminary analyses, and then we also added some additional analyses in our main tests, in tests of our main aims. I'm going to bring up something that's going to be obvious to you, but I'm going to talk about it because of what the implications of it might be. Whenever you're revising and resubmitting your paper, and whenever you're submitting a paper for the first time, remember to go back and look for every possible instance of any kind of grammatical errors, any kind of typographical errors, any kind of, when I submit papers back, I always rerun my analyses, even if I've run them 100 times before, I run them again just in case. I do all of that. And the reason why I do that is that if errors appear in the paper, and it's a lot of them, reviewers have a tendency to start thinking, if this is how error prone the paper is, I wonder what the quality of the work was. So it's usually a marker that a reviewer and an editor sees for the quality of the underlying work. So you want to avoid doing this. I always think about peer review in the following way. This process can take several revisions. You can get to R4, R5, R6 before the editor finally says it's good enough and passes our thresholds of the general publication. That's just the way this process goes. The editor knows that, the reviewers know that, and you should know that as well. And so I always give a clear indication, whether it's the first revision or the fifth revision. Always say, I always give a strong indication that I'm willing to do any other revisions that they think are necessary. It doesn't matter how many times I've resubmitted the paper. So I always say, the final line of the cover letter, of my cover letters, always say, needless to say, we would be quite pleased to make any further revisions. And you might say to yourself, oh, it pains me to say this because I'm sick of reading this. I'm sick of reading my thesis. I'm sick of reading my dissertation. I'm sick of reading this paper. But the more you do that, the more you make it clear to everybody involved that you are not going anywhere. You are going to stick to this process to the end. And broadly speaking, you want your work to be as high quality as a piece of work as everybody else does. So you want the same outcome that everybody else does. You want the best possible work that you can possibly produce. After you publish a few papers, people are going to notice your name. They're going to notice your name. They're going to see your name in lights published in this journal. After a while, you start getting a reputation. So-and-so really interested in autism. So-and-so really interested in parenting. So-and-so really interested in dissemination and implementation science. After a while, editors start seeing your name pop up and they start saying, you know what, I should invite this person to review the paper. Especially at the beginning of your career and throughout your career, it's important for you to give back. Remember I mentioned before, reviewers do this for free. And that means at some point, people are going to expect you to do this for free too. I'll go one further. After you've published a couple of papers, usually editors are quite fine with inviting you to be a reviewer. It's okay. And I encourage it for you to email editors and say, you're open to reviewing manuscripts. Here's my CV. You feel that you have competency in these areas. Let me know if I can be of any help. Right? And there's I believe there's oh no, there actually isn't a link in there, but I'll keep this email short. Just say, you're so-and-so. You benefit greatly from the work published in the journal. If you can be of any help reviewing, here's a CV. Happy to be of help whenever it's useful to you. So those are all the strategies that we have for when the system treats you fairly. But I mentioned before that sometimes the system could do a better job of giving you a fair evaluation of your work. And we're going to go through a few of those strategies now. One of the strategies, nobody means anything by it, but every once in a while you do get reviewer one saying something, reviewer two saying another thing, and those two things you can't do in the same paper. I think you should do the regression this way. And reviewer two is like, I don't think you should do regressions at all. So how do you reconcile that? Well, the easiest thing to do there is to make clear in the cover letter to the editor. Look, here's one comment I got. Here's another comment I got. We carefully consider them because they're both great ideas, and we decided to, and then clarify which one you would rather do. Even if you're wrong, and the editor is like, I actually think you should have done the other one, you'll get another chance to respond. They won't reject it outright, but you just got to make it clear that you got conflicting advice, and you knew you couldn't do them both, so you picked one. Let's say it's coming down to the final days of the review process. You got your paper back, yesterday, and you got 2 months to submit, but it's 2 months later and you're almost done, but you need more time. Just ask the editor. Email the editor and just ask. They want the best version of your work as possible. So nobody's going to take your kidneys if you want more time. Just ask for it. You'll get it. You will never take a reviewer class. Nobody does. Most of us learn how to be a reviewer from working with our mentor on a co-review. That's usually how all of us start. And so reviewers are like anybody else. If they didn't take a class and they're not in a particularly good mood, they might be kind of mean, you know. Sometimes it goes too far, like the missed the boat comment was too far. It wasn't nice. I've only done this like 2 or 3 times in my entire career. But if it gets particularly bad where you're not even sure you got a fair review out of this person, it's useful for you to bring it up to the editor. So with that paper, go back to the very first thing I mentioned. We emailed the editor and said, you know what, we're really excited to address the comments. We can't wait to start, but reviewer 2's tone, man, seriously? That was bad, you know, and we don't do this. We don't do this to restart the process. What we're doing is basically saying, we just want to raise this concern to you. We just want to bring this up, because what the editor will come back and say is something like, you know, do you want me to restart the process? And then you always say, no. Keep the process as is. That's great. I'll respond to the commentary. We just wanted to bring it to your attention. And the reason why is because now you've gone to the R&R process. You have no idea that if you restart the process, you actually get the recommendation to send it back. So at least you got to this stage. So it's better to go to move forward in an R&R stage with reviewer 2 being how they are, than restarting the process. You have no idea what's going to happen with that process. You have some idea what happened with this process. Sometimes it goes so far where you say to yourself, I'm seeing a pattern here. I think reviewer 2 on the last paper is the same reviewer 2 in this paper, and the other 2 papers that I submitted recently. And you know, at most of these journals, the grand majority of journals, the process is masked. You actually don't know who the reviewer is, and many times they don't know who you are. But reviewers are kind of like CSI, like they leave some signs of who they are. You never know for sure who it is, but they leave signals that might be there. Like they tell you to cite them. They don't say that it's them, but you notice. Isn't it weird that like you keep on putting the same author in all your comments over and over and over again? You know, so they do things like that. And so what happens if you discover somebody like that? Well, a couple of things you can do. In your cover letter, you can select somebody who shouldn't review your paper, right? Your editor can keep them out of the process, the process, but it's important for you to do other things besides say that person should review. You have to give a rationale. And the important thing with giving the rationale is that you also take some of the blame on it as well. Because let's be frank. Let's say that you and reviewer 2 take a completely different stance on the work. You have different theoretical frameworks. You have use different measures, different paradigms. There's no right way to do the work, but you see the work in very different ways. That's a philosophical difference, and that you can't reconcile, and that's fine. But you cite that, and then it's also important to say, look, this difference is so bad that if I get invited to review this work, and I think it's reviewer 2, I take the blame too. I say I can't be objective, so I decline. I decline to review the paper. And just be open with it, because you know, quite frankly, do you really think you can be an objective evaluator of somebody who you think isn't objective with you? Chances are you can't. And so that's when I have to do that. That's another thing that I add to the cover letter. I respectfully request that so-and-so not serve as a reason. Don't do it too much. Only cite like 2 of these, no more than 1 or 2 of these at any one time. But then you also give the recommendations before the recommendations section, like I mentioned before. Sometimes you get an R&R, and you submit a publication. You revise as for the commentary, and you think you did a good job, but they reject it afterwards. You know, sometimes we have a tendency to sort of say to ourselves, I want to fight back on this. But in this kind of context, it's usually important to just sort of say, you know what, I want to go back to this journal someday. I'm not going to push for this unless I really think this paper is worth fighting for. And then you just go to another place, just restart the process. What I would do is go back to the reviews there, look to see if there's any deal breakers in the commentary where there's some things you couldn't address that eventually you realize I should have done this, you know, if that's true, then it might mean that you might shoot for a journal, a publication outlet that's a little lower tier than the one that you went to before, right? And more often than not, this is just a thing that we all do. This is just a part of just the work that we do. Oftentimes, our papers don't get published in our Plan A journal. Sometimes we have to go to Plan B, Plan C, Plan D. I've had papers that I'm really proud of where I got to the Plan E journal before we eventually published it. All part of the process. So I always end these peer review workshops on peer review with a bit of some words of inspiration, because the peer review process is harrowing. So it's a lot of times very difficult to negotiate. And so we talked a lot just now about peer review, and it's a system that we use to evaluate scientific work. And it turns out that scientists created this system centuries ago, and the system is as imperfect as all of us. But the system itself reflects the very nature of the work that we do. Science is hard. It's really difficult work to do. Our work traditionally is underfunded, so it's very difficult to carry all this work. But here's the thing: the best part of the system also strengthens our science, because each time we submit a paper to be evaluated by our peers, the process of revising and finalizing that paper sharpens our thinking, hardens our resolve, and everyone involved becomes a better scientist because of what we do. The important thing to always think about peer review is that it is just a system. It doesn't have aspirations, it doesn't have spirit, it doesn't have drive, it doesn't have determination, it doesn't have motivation, it doesn't have any of those things. That's what you have. So the system can never be as strong as you. The system can't ever get the better of you, just so long as you say to yourself, it doesn't matter what people say in response to my work, I'm still going to move forward. I'm still going to persist. I'm still going to proceed. At the end of all this, what I just want you to do is just take these comments and do the best work that you possibly can. Go back and work harder than you did before we started today. Thank you all for your time. So we're going to take a break. Going to take a lunch break, and then we'll come back in the afternoon and then talk about research programs. Thank you all for your time.